Good evening and welcome to a new show of In Depth. I'm Rick Morelli. On tonight's show we're going to talk about an item that came up in the Hazleton Area School District, which was the opening of the coaches' positions. We're going to hear both sides of the story here. We have some students as well as some school board members. To my left, a good friend of mine, a longtime school board member, Bob Mehalick. To Bob's right, again, another good friend of mine, Ms. Marie Kay, who's on the school board. And to my right, as a student on soccer who's going to speak up, Madison Polumbo. Thank you for joining us. No problem. I appreciate it. And again, we wanted to talk about this, as always. We just want to get the information out to the public. A lot of times you read something in the paper, you hear something, and there's always different sides of the story. So let me throw it to one of you two as to, obviously, the school board decided to open up the positions. Why did this come about? What are the reasons for this?
Well, Rick, let me first say thank you for having us on. I think it's important for the community to hear, the school board as well as our students, and I so appreciate that we have representation from our student athletes. Rick, it had been 4 months of a weekly conversation in executive session of another issue with another sport. And we just keep hearing these allegations, and a lot of them were founded to be true. And it made us really take a good look at the process of our coaches. So it was not specific to one coach or one sport. It was multiple issues on multiple levels. We did have to terminate a few of those positions during the course of the year. And it was at that point where we said we really need, again, to look and evaluate all coaches. We certainly did not want to create any concern or alarm to our students because ultimately we are here. We represent them first and foremost. We appreciate them coming out and them certainly voicing their opinion to us. But I think what I want to stress is that we are not looking to get rid of any one coach. It's not about one coach. It's about us overhauling, if it needs to be overhauled, a process that's been in place a long, long time.
Yeah. So again, and to Marie, I'll ask you, it sounds like what Bob's saying is this is more of a, let's take a step back and reevaluate everything. There's some issues here that apparently a lot of people probably don't know. As you know, what's discussed in executive session usually doesn't get out to the public. I mean, is that fair?
That is correct, and I guess that's why we wanted to address some of the issues today, because I know that the students were very upset. Madison came to the meeting and she is very well spoken, and I appreciate that you came out and stood up for your coach and your sport and your teammates. I really do. That took a lot of courage. The thing is that as board members, we're privileged to some information that the rest of the community doesn't have. Yep. And until we're authorized, we're not allowed to share that information with everyone. So sometimes when we are making a decision, it looks like it's like the crowd that was there that night was saying it was nepotism, it was political. Sooner or later, what we know is going to come out, and people are going to see the reasons why that after I'm on the board 4 months, we did have issue after issue after issue, and parents and teachers coming and saying there's issues with this sport. No one is paying attention to this. So we wanted to take a step back. I was the last person to come on board with opening all of the positions. I was. And that was a very hard decision for me because I know that coaches put a lot of time into the sport and they're really not compensated hourly wise for the amount of hours. But when I did hear some of the allegations, and now we're finding out that they are founded, this really truly was the correct decision for us to take a look at each and every sport. And that does not mean that the coaches are not getting their positions back. It just means we are stepping up. This is not the same old board. We are looking at everything that we possibly can look at.
Right.
And we're going to correct the deficiencies for the kids.
And again, I think it's fair to say, and you probably understand this being in the position, is that a lot of people think, well, are we going after one coach? Is it because somebody doesn't like that coach because their son or daughter didn't play that they thought they would play? And is that what this was all about? Madison, what are your thoughts? What have you've went to the meetings, you've expressed your thoughts and concerns. What are the other students feeling, and where are you coming from on this end?
Basically what I'm coming down to is, like I said, it's not to mean like disrespect to the school board, none of that whatsoever. It just kind of, a lot of it came down to when we asked why, it was more so down to opportunity. That's what Mr. Zola had said, it came down to opportunity. We were kind of looking at it from the student side, the athlete side, that we have all these coaches, and statistically they're putting up good records, they have good relationships with their coaches, so it's kind of like when you're opening up these positions, the students almost feel like, okay, you're having good coaches, so what would be the reason to get rid of them? Like, I understand if you have problems with certain coaches, obviously it's not going to happen, everyone's not going to be picture perfect. But it kind of comes down to just addressing those coaches as opposed to opening up every position. So that's kind of how the students feel, and I feel like at the board meeting when everyone was expressing their thoughts on it, and it kind of came down to everyone was pinpointing one coach. I myself, I didn't say it was down to one coach. It could be multiple, it could be one, you know. I think a lot of that came down to because the decision was so sudden that a lot of people kind of leaned more towards, you know, is it political, is it nepotism, something like that. So as I don't know if you both know about the Facebook page that was created, it was mainly just to get the thoughts and opinions on the athletes, the parents. No coaches, to my knowledge, did anything. Obviously they're not going to, so it just kind of looks bad on their part. But the athletes, the parents, they had all responded, and they were all wondering the same thing, why? And I was like, well, I can't really give an answer to it. The only answer I got was opportunity, and which that's perfectly understandable. You know, I understand, you know, give new people new opportunities, see what new people could do. But from our side, we're kind of looking at it as we have these coaches, they're putting in so much time and effort. They're putting in time and effort that's just off season. Like my coach personally, we may not have the best team, but I mean, we're going up against, you know, teams that they have a better caliber of players than what we're presented with. And regardless, he's putting in so much time to try and make my teammates, he made myself better over, you know, the past 4 years. So it's like, if you bring in a new coach, you don't really have somebody that's going to be able to have this same relationship with players. And, you know, if they're there for a couple years, that'll form, but instantly, especially when things are just starting to change, you can't really do that with a new coach because they don't know the players, they don't know their strengths, their weaknesses, they can't really touch on too much of that. And when it comes down to, you know, once their senior years or junior years and the coaches are looking to, you know, try and further their players, if their players are looking to play in college, like I myself was, you know, they're reaching out to other coaches, they're reaching out to, you know, try and even get them scholarships if it's possible. But if you have a new coach with later players, they can't really do this and help the player to the best of their ability because they can't go and broadcast, you know, a player be like, yeah, you know, this is great about this person and this and that. And there may be things that they're not able to touch so well on. So they could say they're really good at one thing, but it comes down to the point they didn't know them well enough to be able to say, okay, maybe this person's good, you know, they get a little pressure, they're not so good, but they're advertising the opposite thing because they don't know the player that well. So that's kind of how the athletes are looking at it.
So let me ask you, the question is obviously there are coaches that have some questions out there that can only be discussed in executive session. There's some coaches that probably should be looked at, but then you have coaches like Joe Gavia. I mean, here's a guy who, if I was back on the board, I'd name a gymnasium after him, in my opinion. So with people like him and a few others, you're going to open up those positions. So that means somebody could apply for his position as well as others. And again, is this something that the school board is going to do now annually, every year, or is this just a one-time thing to reevaluate and see where we're at, or is it going to be done?
No. And it's, you know, ironic you bring up Mr. Gavio. One is a personal friend of mine, as you know, Rick. And yes, he's a tremendous example of what we want our coaches to be and to represent us. However, he was probably the first one that reached out to me and said, I understand what you have to do. And he said, if I've done everything right, because right is not necessarily wins and losses. Mm-hmm. There's so much more than that. Yeah. Okay, and you said, you know, we're not maybe the best soccer team, but you know what? You're improving year after year after year, and you represent our school so well, and that's what's important. It really isn't about wins and losses, especially for me. But what it is about is how you represent our students and our community. Yep. And Joe's been a perfect example of that. But he was the first to reach out to me, Rick, and tell me, I understand what you have to do. If I've done everything I should do for my students and for my team, I have nothing to fear. Mm-hmm. Who's going to be able to come in there and take that job from Mr. Gavio? Be very, very hard. These coaches, if they've done everything that they should do, I don't think any of them have anything to fear. But we do have multiple issues, Rick, and they continue to come out as recently within the last 24 hours.
So again, these are issues more than, like you said, wins and losses.
Right.
These are not issues it's about representing our community and being around, which is a very delicate, the students.
Absolutely.
And doing the right things in many different ways. Marie?
I think that I always try to look at it from the student's point of view, and I apologize to you, Madison, because I do know that it created a huge stir for the kids, and it was never meant to upset the kids or cause disruption. That's why we asked the coaches to keep everything the way it was for their student athletes until we were through this process. And I'm going to ask the public to just please have a little bit of faith in the people that you elected, because we do have information there were issues. I don't understand how this became about really one coach, and that baffles me.
Well, that's how things spread. We know that,
but
and we've
this is
seen
Hazleton,
that, so,
and that's how it
right,
goes. And one rumor fuels another, but it really was a problem within the sports programs, and that's why we're looking at each season, and we're going to do this continually until we feel as adults that these programs are running correctly for our students.
Mm-hmm.
We have great kids here. These kids will go on, to college. They'll do great things. They'll play sports. They'll, be the next leaders of the country, and we do want the best for them. So I'm just going to ask the public to please have just a little bit of faith in us, because there will be things that when they do finally surface, people will understand the reason why we did this.
Okay.
Yeah, and Rick, it is intended to be business as usual.
Yeah.
If they're doing off-season conditioning and off-season participation, and that should continue. These coaches have not been replaced. They have not been terminated. Okay, it is a process, and some do need to, all need to reapply.
Yeah.
But we were not terminating or halting the seasons at all.
Very good. Unfortunately, we're going to take a quick break. Bob, you need to run. I want to thank you for joining us. You're always welcome here and to give some info. We're going to replace you with a younger guy who looks kind of like you. And he's another athlete here on the football team. So you're watching In Depth, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to In Depth. We're here tonight talking about the opening of the coaching positions in the Hazleton Area School District. Now joining us, replacing school board member Bob Mehalick, we have an athlete here who plays football, Jake Oressce. Jake, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. So you've been sitting out here listening to the first half of the show, and let me throw it to you first. You've heard both sides with regards to the opening of the positions. What's your take on it, and what are you hearing from some of your counterparts?
So, I definitely understand exactly where the school board's coming from, and, what they have to say about it, what their point of view is on it. Just from the athlete's point of view, I like to top off of what Madison said. Recruiting, a lot of times it's going to be hard if the coach, they don't know the coach is coming back. The coach doesn't know if he's coming back. I don't know if it's just, I know at the school board meeting they asked the school board why would the coaches come back if they don't know that they have a coaching position? And I don't know, I feel like if I was in that position where I have no clue if I'm going to be a coach, if I'm going to be the coach next year, I have to reapply, if I'm going to still stay as dedicated to all the athletes. But, I definitely understand where the school board's coming from in that retrospect, of course.
So I want to ask both of you, and I don't want any specifics, but you've talked to other student athletes, other coaches. Again, being in the district and around kids, it's so delicate. We see so many stories. Do you ever hear of things where you've heard your counterparts, friends, who said they've heard, let's say, certain things that are unethical by coaches to students? I mean, have you ever witnessed, not without getting specifics as to who, but things that were borderline?
We heard, from at least I have, I don't know if Madison has, but I've heard from certain athletes that there was a coach in one of the sports, and that coach they didn't think was a good fit for the program. They definitely did not get along with that coach. So that's where I see the school board side of it. The only thing that I don't understand is where at the end of each year, we already have a program in place where we have to fill out a form rating each coach and how we feel about the program, if we'd recommend it and stuff like that. And on that, you're supposed to, without the coaches knowing what you're talking about, it doesn't get sent to the coaches. It only goes to the athletic directors. So what we do is we have to fill out, if there's any recommendations we had, if we had a good time with the coaches, if we liked the coaches, stuff like that. And I don't know why something like that couldn't be taken care of in what's already in place. Like if there's a certain sport and there's certain group of kids who play that sport that say, I do not like this coach, I can't get along with this coach, we don't like this coach, why isn't it addressed directly to that coach?
Right. I mean, and what we don't want, and we definitely have heard it from many different angles of different people, where parents you have students who probably think they should play more or don't play as much, and they get mad at the coaches, and we've seen that. And Maria, I'm sure you've seen that more often as both a parent and a school board member.
That was not part of this decision at all. As far as the forms that the athletes fill out at the end of the year, we have now asked to see those. So for the sports that we have issues with, that people have come forward with issues, we will look at those. We didn't get those. That's where the disconnect was. That was part of opening the programs. So if you hear it from one person, if you hear from one parent, one student athlete, 2, maybe 3, you're thinking, okay, well, could just be sour grapes. Right. But when you hear it from multiple people, and remember that for every person that comes to the meeting in support of a coach, there's 10 people behind the scenes that won't step up to the plate and say something publicly. So we do have a lot of information, and we are trying as fast as we can to weed through that as to not disrupt the sports for the kids. And I hope that people understand that. There were some issues that were just something that we could not look over.
Right.
And like I said, I'm sure that, it's a small town, everything will come out in the wash, and then people will understand. And until then, we can't say anything.
Yep. Madison, I'll come back to you. Your thoughts here on some of the things that board members have said.
I can agree on what Jacob said, where, you just kind of hear through the grapevine, there might be an issue going on with a certain coach and it kind of gets taken care of. Kind of going back on what I said at the board meeting, if there is, because like you keep saying that there's issues with like certain coaches, so it comes down to opening all the positions. I think it kind of comes down to, like, if you have an issue with that one coach or even this small group of coaches, like another question that's kind of raised is why not address those particular coaches? Because it's not like, you're singling anybody out as opposed to the rest. If you're, there's proof of issues with that certain coach. So as opposed to, just addressing that coach or, that small group of coaches that there's an issue with, instead of opening all the positions, because if you look back at the same thing, if you have a teacher that you have an issue with, or, a small group of teachers that you may be having issues with, generally it's, it's discussed with that teacher, the issues taken care of with that teacher. It's not, you don't decide to just, okay, well, let's open up all teaching positions, because, it's ridiculous to do. It's a waste of time, energy. So it's just kind of like, that's just another question that gets raised that a lot of people are asking, where if it's like, if it comes down to these couple coaches, like you said, why open all positions?
So, go ahead.
I think we decided to open all of them because we just weren't sure where the issues were, and we weren't getting the information that we needed. And so to make sure that we were protecting all of the students in the school district, we needed to take a good look at all of the positions. And the teachers are a little bit different. No, you wouldn't get rid of all of the teachers, but they're protected under a union. So they have steps. Where we found out that with the coaches, there were no steps to correct deficiencies. I had asked Mr. Barletta that. Are there steps in place to correct deficiencies if you have them with the coaches? And there was not, and everyone got a satisfactory. Well, if we're hearing this information and everybody's review is satisfactory, there's a disconnect there. So we really wanted to take a good look at to see where the problem lies, and do we need to change some kind of policy to make sure that our student athletes are protected.
And I think it's fair to say that with all this, the board members are going to have pressure on them, because there are a lot of coaches out there. I don't even know how many, but there are a lot, and we're talking high school, junior high, et cetera. Clearly, there's a light here shining down saying, all right, is this because of we want to go after a coach? There's no question. One of the rumors that are out there, I'll say it, is Mike Joseph. Again, I think he's a good coach. I was actually on the board when we hired him, and he's a dedicated person. But the question is that, all right, you have your issues with certain coaches that no one's really going to fully understand, and the public needs to put their confidence with the school board knowing that, hey, we're doing the right things. What the school board has to be cautious with is if there's somebody who has a good record, who's a good person, who works hard, who works with the booster clubs, raises money, they're good for the kids. Again, it's not about the wins or losses, but tries to get the kids in school. If there's that person out there who all of a sudden suddenly pops up as leaving versus other people, that's where they think the controversy will go. That's just my thoughts on this.
Right, and I agree, but again, we're in a lose-lose situation. We're not in an easy position where whatever decision you make, you're going to make half of the people happy and half of the people mad. So you have to do what your gut is telling you and just stick by your convictions. And like I said, I was the last person to agree to open the positions, but after knowing what I know, I feel that it was the right one to make.
But again, the fact that the positions are open does not mean that these people cannot apply, they can apply or get the job again.
They are not fired. Solicitor Slesser made that very clear at the meeting that they were not fired. It was business as usual. Every position would be open, every position would be looked at, and then we will refill them. And we are trying to do this as fast as we can. And we really do meet a lot, probably more than a lot of the boards did. And we do meet more than most of the other school districts.
Do other school districts, have they done this, do you know? Has anyone come to you and said, here's what we do, or how we've done that?
There are school districts that do open their positions every year. I think it's Hershey, and there's one other one. I'm sorry that it
right, but there are
slips my
some that
mind.
do.
But
I mean,
there
everyone
are,
has their different ways.
they go every year. The coaches that really didn't have anything to worry about were the coaches that came to us and said, we understand why you're doing this, and we're okay with it, and we'll just reapply.
Do you mind if I just ask a question?
No, go ahead.
When you were touching back, when you said about that you didn't know particularly what exactly was going on, if you said that this year when it's kind of started to become a little bit more of an issue, when you reviewed those papers and you said prior that you couldn't look at those, it only went to the athletic director, and now that they were moved?
No, we could always look at them.
Okay.
The thing is they were supposed to come to the board if there was an issue.
Okay.
So that seems to be where the disconnect is. Who thinks that there's an issue?
Okay, if you were saying that there wasn't, it's like you didn't know particularly what coach, if you're looking at those forms, it's like, how do you not know what coach it is?
We did not look at the forms yet.
Okay.
That was part of the issue.
Okay.
And so I just took my seat in December, and it kind of snowballed to the point where this is what, the person who was in charge of athletics thought was the right thing to do. And at first I did not agree, but then, after listening to her and her concerns and the rest of the board members and some people, parents and students and teachers, then, I was on board and decided to go along with that it was something that we needed to look at. So I will stand behind my decision to vote that way, even though everyone else doesn't understand it, but I think in the long run, people will.
Well, and that's fair. I mean, I've been there, obviously, and it's tough, because you want to be able to sit here and say to the public, here's what we know, but you can't because there's liabilities to the district, to the taxpayers, and that's something that you have to be careful with. So it's a tough position. Jake, any other thoughts here?
One thing that I think, as she had said, was that there's a disconnect between where the problem lied with coaches. I feel like a lot of athletes, they felt like, the athletes that I know that had a problem with a coach, I feel like that they thought their voice wasn't heard. So I feel like there should be something else in place that makes sure that on those forms that people are looking at them and people are actually hearing their opinions about it.
And I agree
instead
with
of,
that.
I understand the whole opening all the positions right away, I understand that. But one thing was that a lot of people didn't feel like their voice was heard, and I feel like the school board or somebody else should be looking at these forms to know a specific coach that they're having a problem with, because it was a specific coach that I know a group of athletes were having a problem with, and their voice was never heard with it.
See, and I think that that's what I was trying to allude to, is that's what we were hearing. And when you have athletes themselves coming to you and saying, like, there's a problem, but no one's listening to us. As a mother, I want to listen to them, you know, and that's pretty much what we're doing. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I do hope that the kids do understand. Madison, I have a great respect for you for coming and speaking, and I hope that you do understand it was never anything to hurt the kids. And I want you to take back to the student athletes that this board does care about the kids, and we do want to listen to them. And anytime anyone has a problem, they're more than welcome to approach us.
Well, and again, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I do want to say, first of all, kudos to both of you for stepping up and expressing your concerns. I mean, that's the first thing that you should do, the public should do whenever, because if there's a lot of rumors that take place, and if you don't ask the questions or put your foot forward, you're never going to know. On the school board side, I totally understand where you're coming from. There's always two sides of the story. Most of the time people hear only half or a quarter, but you're in a tough position to make those tough decisions that sometimes are not popular decisions, and you have to do that. Again, there's clearly there's a lot more to discuss, a lot more to move forward here, but we're out of time. And again, I want to thank all of you for joining us and sharing both sides of it. We wish you both luck in college, and hopefully a nice prom coming up here. Marie, thank you for your time as always, and wish you the best. And I want to thank everyone for joining us here on In Depth, and we will see you next time. So have a great evening.